Welcome viewers, Dr. JWAU, theologist since 1994. Like and subscribe to the channel to help, comment to educate me, and share to help somebody else. I saw a Facebook post by Honourable Senator David Littleproud, on the ISIS brides and the collapse of government confidence. So this is a political behavioural analysis. David Littleproud's statement, and I'll put a link to it in the description, cut through the entire ISIS brides controversy with one brutal compression line. The only reason they want to come back to Australia is they lost. I'm going to read that again. The only reason they want to come back to Australia is they lost. And that sentence changed the emotional atmosphere immediately because it reframed the debate away from rehabilitation, procedural language and citizenship, administration, and technical legality back to allegiance, ideological loyalty, national consequence, and public safety. And that's why the statement resonated so strongly, not because Australians universally reject mercy, but because many Australians increasingly feel the government speaking about extremism with emotionally softened language, while the public still psychologically experiences ISIS as civilizational hostility. So Littleproud's comments matter because they expose the widening gap between government, administration and framing and public moral instinct. And the Albanese government speaks of technically, procedurally, operationally, but many Australians are asking, do our leaders still emotionally grasp what ISIS actually represented and represents now? And that's the fracture underneath the story. Point one, they lost. Everything changes. This is the line that psychologically disabled and destabilised the government's softer framing. The only reason they want to come back is they lost. Because that sentence implies the ideological allegiance was real, the commitment was real, the departure from Australia was meaningful, and the return is not necessarily evidence of moral transformation. And that's a completely different behavioural framework from mistakes were made or we must reintegrate compassionately. Littleproud's framing introduces consequence psychology, and millions of Australians immediately recognise the emotional seriousness inside it. Point number two, the public trust problem. Then comes the second layer. The government says risk is managed, processes exist, laws are being followed, monitoring frameworks are active, but the listener keeps asking, why does it still feel like nobody asked us whether we wanted any of this at all? And that's the democratic fracture. The citizen increasingly feels decisions are made above them, language is managed carefully afterward, and the public's expected to emotionally adapt to the outcome. And that creates alienation, especially when the government simultaneously appears reluctant to fully own the operational reality of the returns themselves. Point number three, the contradiction inside authority. This is where the issue becomes psychologically corrosive, because the public hears we did not assist, while also hearing public gratitude toward the government for facilitating the return. The public hears risk is controlled, while simultaneously hearing de-radicalisation apparently not being universally mandatory. So the public hears safety is a priority while wondering, then why does the government appear more concerned about procedural defensibility than moral clarity? And that contradiction destroys confidence in the Australian public rapidly. Point number four, the listener enters the story. And this is where the listener becomes emotionally trapped inside the issue personally, because ordinary Australians begin asking themselves, what exactly does citizenship still mean? What are the limits of national loyalty? What ideological boundaries still exist? what consequences remain real, and who actually carries the long-term risk if government assessments fail. And that's when the listener realises the burden never falls onto the minister personally. The burden falls onto, you guessed it, communities, police, intelligence agencies, public trust, and ordinary Australians themselves, not only psychologically and publicly in terms of their safety and welfare, but financially. And that is why the story feels so emotionally volatile. Point number 5, the collapse of moral confidence. Senator Littleproud's statement ultimately resonated because it restored something many citizens feel government language has lost: moral seriousness. Not cruelty, not vengeance, moral seriousness. And the publicly increasingly fears ideological extremism is being linguistically softened, consequence is being therapeutically reframed, and governments are asking populations to emotionally normalise what once would have been considered absolutely and utterly unthinkable in Australia. And that is the real national fear underneath this debate. The ISIS brides controversy is no longer simply about repatriation, viewers, Australia. It has become a referendum on national confidence, consequence structures, ideological boundaries, government honesty, and whether modern political authority still understands the psychological foundations of public trust. Because once Australian citizens begin believing their government speaks about extremism with administrative calm, while the population still feels existentially uneasy, the fracture stops being political, viewers and listeners. It becomes civilisational. It becomes Australian. And so in closing, let me finish with this. A nation, Australia, begins losing trust when its people feel the government is managing the language surrounding extremism, radicalism, fanaticism of the Islamic nature more aggressively than it is confronting the extremism itself. I'm Dr. J.W.A., theologist since 1994. Like and subscribe to help the channel, comment to educate me, and share to help somebody else.